it's just conversants.com/plantuml, but using those servers, it doesn't have the whole HTML service. It's just something you can post and plantuml, and it will give you back the PNG or the SVG. What I do in what I do here, is that the one? PlantUML, but if I look at PlantUML, it's just basically Java jar of that thing. That's, for me, is being installed by Homebrew, but it's.
Hey, sorry guys, had internet problem.
Hey, Felix.
Hello.
All right, let's get going.
Yep.
We got enough quorum here, I think.
Yeah, but I just wanted to point out this is just the jar and telling it where dot is and telling it this and that. It's pretty primitive to set up. You just need to download the jar and make it. Like, the advantage of me having it on the package manager is I get auto updates, but other than that. And then it maintains the SVG file, and then I've got an SVG viewer, and the SVG viewer auto updates when the SVG file changes, which makes for a very nice workflow. Felix, you suggested another solution, and I'm afraid I did not save the chat, and I'm curious about it.
It's
Let's
called,
table this. I really don't want to spend this time talking about tooling.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Cool.
But yeah, we can, put it in the Hangouts or General or whatever. There you go, HackMD.
Yep. You're deciding.
Okay. What's that?
You're deciding. That's cool.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's see. Last time we completed 3. I kind of wrote out more of the process, but it's basically what we were doing, which is we'll just keep iterating like this. So the next step is to choose the next use case that we want to attack here or incorporate.
Yeah, I think a quick recap on whether or not constraints should be part of use case or separate use cases might be in order. The short discussion we had in chat, Timothy.
Yeah, after that chat, I decided I would prefer them being done as use cases, so that it's more explicit as to what the constraints are and why, and they get kind of officially incorporated. Does anybody have a counter proposal?
I'm fine with that. I think it makes it explicit. It makes the process slower. So the only reason to do it as part of a single use case would be it could be quicker, but by making it part of separate use case, it becomes much more explicit, which is, I think, what we need.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going for.
You're saying you want an example that justifies transitivity? Is that what you're saying, for example?
No, the constraints. Let me try to frame what Tim is suggesting based on my short chat with him. That constraints are not modeled as part of these relations if they're not modeled as use cases. So right now, anti-reflexive, symmetric, anti-transitive is not there, basically. So there are no constraints with the current use cases we have. If we want to add constraints, we need to add those as extra use cases. And I added one that I was interested in as part of the proposed use cases as an example.
Okay, where is the use case document again? I cannot find it quickly.
So Tim, just a quick question to see whether we aligned. Does that mean that if
I'll share it.
use case doesn't mention constraints, so there's a relation between like here negation equivalent, there are no constraints to that, right?
Right.
Okay.
Bottom design use case.
So the node should be removed to be on par with the current use case list, I think.
Got it.
Did you find the link? If not, I'm gonna post it.
No, I got it.
My computer is really slow whenever we're doing so.
Anybody else needs it?
Me, please.
Yep. Oh.
Thank you.
And now Zoom has switched, or Apple has switched the order of my workspaces. So thanks. hard to find. Okay, so right. So if there's and that's fine to have use cases that don't go to the finest detail. If they're just, it's ideally it's adding one element at a time, and we leave the other stuff to be discussed in the next use case. So Stephen, which is the use case you propose? In fact,
I selected it in the current list. So if you
okay, what I put in as our process as we get better at this is, like, we have listed all these potential use cases, and anything somebody wants to be the next one we discuss, you change the status to proposed. So it would be like that. Bentley, did you want to propose the one you're highlighting? I know.
Yes, and although you have a comment on there that says we could simplify it, which is definitely fine. I was struggling with wording for it, but I would just like to go to arguments rather than going so deep on claim, because we're getting into, a lot of areas that loop around on each other and require a lot of discussion, as opposed to just the core of a debate and an argument is pros and cons. But definitely be an argument is created in support of a claim. Oh, just start with support as opposed to support or oppose. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because you've kind of assumed that
It doesn't oppose.
the claim is supporting or opposing. Like, I guess you could say a claim, a user posts a claim in support of another claim. I don't know. I guess claims equivalent to a claim.
Working on?
Wait, we haven't. It's proposed. We have to choose, and I want to understand a little better. Stephen's here. Claims.
Okay.
Yeah, claims equivalent to a claim, which is a negation of a second claim, are also the negation of that second claim.
So the problem with the current model is that why I suggest this use case is to show why there is a problem with the current model, where you have too many relations without any constraints. Like, the use case here is that should be enforced in the model. Like, how do you model that? That's so first of all.
Okay, but it doesn't quite match in the construction of a use case, and I think it needs to be broken up a little more. Okay. You're saying more like a mathematical rule rather than something that happens. And one thing that I had mentioned as a way to show this through a use case would be, because where do we have? A user asserts that a claim is a negation of another claim, right? We've done that one. A user asserts that a claim is the negation of another claim. Okay, that's in the model. So that can be done. What I would say is something like a user asserts that a claim is the negation of itself, but is prevented by the system. But the system prevents it.
Yeah, but that's a different constraint. But yeah,
I know, but it's one at a time, right? I think we need several use cases to get to encapsulate the different.
Okay, but
yeah.
Or we could start with the symmetry on equivalence, like a claim is equivalent to itself, and I would go further. The system should prevent somebody, well, not prevent, but because for me, that's a use case. Somebody said two claims are equivalent, and somebody else says, oh no, those two claims are not equivalent, they're a negation. And basically the system should say, okay, there's a conflict there that needs to be resolved. I wouldn't say prevent it. In the case of symmetric, yes, it should be prevented, because that obviously makes no sense. But I could see also something where there's so many cases with negation, right? if I say A is negation of B, B is the negation of C, then that also entails A is equivalent to C.
Right, but
that, which is something else, but I'm saying there's all these things exist, and I don't know if they all need a use case, maybe they do. But what I'm saying also is it makes sense for people to say contradictory things because that's conflict, and conflict is legitimate.
Yeah, but it raises
to
a
be
question
resolved.
again, whether we're modeling what people say or we're modeling in which format the canonical argument will be stored, which was my whole point of contention. But let's, yeah, so you want to do a use case first approach. So how do we determine that following a use case first approach, Timothy?
you have to come up with a use case that specifically shows the problem. In the example I have here, that the system disallows it, I think is something we can all agree to without further complications, because this is the claim being a negation of itself. This isn't, it's a negation of something else, and somebody else proposed that it is equivalent to something else. That's a separate discussion of how the system would deal with that. But in this case, it's just, you can't say something's a negation of itself. It doesn't make sense.
It's called a paradox.
It's a paradox, and should the system support a paradox? That's the question.
I won't push for it for a change.
So that's why this to me seems like the simplest possible constraint we could.
Yeah, I agree. I'm okay with that. The reason I added the more complicated one is because it's an interesting one that shows the problems with the current model. But yeah, let's start with yours first. I'm fully on board.
Does everybody else agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the one where
so a user now. It's not a user asserts, a user wants to assert or tries to assert.
Yeah, okay, a user tries to assert. That's good.
The other ones go back to declared, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we could take shorthand and leave them as proposed, because you might want to propose them again next time, but yeah, they go back to declared. Okay, I mean, this, how do we model this? Essentially, I mean, it would be a constraint, you have to model the constraint. So we did throw in constraint modeling last time. We just kind of did it without discussing the constraints. So is that how we should model it here? Is just say,
I think so. I don't think there's a good way to do this as part of the class diagram without constraints. I mean, in the database, I could insert a rule in entity relation model.
A check constraint or something.
But yeah, but it would still be in the constraints. It would not be in the, it would be on insert or on update trigger. It would not be inherent to the structure of the table. It would be a trigger constraint.
Okay, so is the way to do it just through notes then here? You have the anti-reflexive symmetric. For now, that note's just gonna remind us. We haven't added it as an official constraint, and we should now. No, we should now add one official constraint, which is claim negation relation cannot refer to itself.
Let me put question marks on those we haven't yet. We don't have use cases for yet. Anti-reflexive is now backed by
adding it as a node is one option, and indeed it's the anti-reflexive one, if I'm not mistaken, after my reading last week. Just a side note here, the way I model that and enforce it in the model is by storing the negation and the normal form within one object, and those I use. So there is no such thing as negation relations in my current system, which is
right. But I don't like, how does the model enforce that constraint? I don't think it does, because you could create an object that just refers to the same claim in both references, right? And you have the same problem. You still
he has one claim, but it's still.
I don't quite get it. Can you elaborate?
What you're saying is you created a class that's the association class, right?
No, he did.
I have a class that has both the normal form and the negation form optional.
Oh, I see. Right. but
Something like that.
Not a claim. It's two sentences. One is a normal sentence. The other one is a negation sentence.
right. But is there anything that prevents you having the exact same sentence in the negation attribute?
Curation. So no, the system doesn't, but it's the same when.
So that's a constraint.
Right.
Yeah, but it's.
I'm gonna have to run an errand and stuff in the middle of this call, so I'm gonna need to make someone co-host. And if I'm not around when the meeting ends, if you can end meeting for all. So I don't know. I could either make Tim, since he's the dictator, or Marc Antoine, since he's the secretary.
Tim.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, make me. That's fine.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so the reason I do it like that is because for me, every claim has a negation, so they always come hand in hand.
So let me pause there. Like I agree, and that's the way I've been modeled, and that's the way I've modeled in debate map. But following the process, this implies that every claim has a negation attribute. Every claim has a negation. That's not a use case yet.
True.
Right. So I would say again, let's just do it the simple way, and that would be a note on the negation relationship that would say cannot be self-referential. I guess is that what anti-reflexive is?
Anti-reflexive, I think, right? Marc Antoine?
Yep.
So do it on the.
But right now I'm not writing it in because this is not a use case. I'm just writing it as a comment, as
Right.
you know, something suggested. Do you want me to put it in the model?
No.
Yeah, I would say no.
I have a hard time writing then the new requirement that I mentioned as a use case, which is because you want it to, as a user.
So
wait. Okay, a user wants to see a negation for a claim. Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know.
I'll help you refine that in a second. But are we done with this modeling by just taking off the question mark from anti-reflexive?
Well, I would remove symmetric and anti-transitive because we don't have those yet.
Yeah, he
Okay,
said like he put a question mark there as
Okay.
suggestion. I'm okay with that. I mean, there's also a claim. Where's the claim equivalence?
Well, that would be maybe
so
I should
want the same
start writing
thing.
that use case.
That would be a separate use case, yeah. So we could tackle that one real quick if you want, which is a user tries to assert that a claim is the equivalence of itself, but the system disallows it.
Oh, whoa! No disagreement there. Why would the system disallow saying that a claim is equivalent to itself? It is. Claim is
it's a tautology. You don't need to say it. The system already knows it's itself. It's creating. It's like creating an entrance and an entry in a database table that says A equals A. You don't need that.
Who's the user here? Is it a user on the website, or is it a developer, or is it a? Because I mean,
it's a good question. We haven't come up with, because we haven't introduced user yet. We haven't introduced, like, we don't have a class for user. So you're right. We should use the passive, right?
I would
an
argue
assertion. Yeah.
Have use cases from the domain, right? And the claim is equivalent to itself.
That's fine, but there's no action that is assert that a claim is itself. That's the point.
Okay.
The use case would be more if a user says that nothing changes in the data model or something like that. But
yeah,
it simply means that the use case doesn't have an effect on the data model, right?
Yeah, a claim being equivalent to itself is implicit, and asserting it has no effect. That's what I would say.
And
I don't know if that's a use case.
There's a bit of a problem with like modeling data modeling choices as use cases, because all of a sudden you need to introduce use cases that operate on a data model and not on a domain model in order to modify the data model. It's very weird.
There is that, but
right, we're dealing with a lot of what's the term? I don't know, conceptual impedance layers between
Impedance mismatch.
trying to
Yeah.
do impedance mismatch and trying to do lots of things through a single lens. I agree with that. The reason we're doing it is in order to have a repetitive process that doesn't have too much confusion, right? I know this is confusing. We all are on the same page as we don't really mean user because it's not a capital U, right? We haven't introduced user into the,
Yeah.
and we haven't introduced the system either as a thing.
Yeah, but it's true that these are not so much use cases. They're not use cases. They're system
Domain constraints.
Well, or
System events.
I wouldn't even call them that. They're desiderata. Like, you know, when you say they're a bit, I'm trying to remember the exact term, but when you're contracting for a system in an old style waterfall thing, you're saying the system must do this and that and this and that. Like, these are requirements, really.
They're requirements, right?
Yeah, requirements is the term I was looking for.
Yeah.
And they're requirements. They're not use cases. They're not user stories for sure. And there may not even be use cases. There's there's a bit of a mismatch here. We're not thinking from a user's perspective. We're thinking from a requirement perspective. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but I think we have to be aware of the distinction.
I think that's a good point. And in fact, we can that frees us up to state it in more of the language that you want to use here, which is like, it is not possible to state the system, like, it's not possible to state that a claim is the negation of itself.
Can't we argue with confusion of the user or something? That, like, user should not see stuff that doesn't make sense.
And I think that's still a requirement and not a use case. I mean, what are use cases? The user, you know, enters a claim and wants to know if the claim is already in the system. That's a use case. The user finds a claim and wants to understand if all that the claim entails, but that's a separate layer. We didn't get into entailment yet. The space of equivalent statements gives the user a fuller understanding of what the claim means. And that way, that's a use case. Like, you want the user wants to understand what the claim means, and that means looking at synonyms may be helpful if the user is not familiar with the claims language, right? I think that's more user-centric. We care about negation. Why? It's because, and that's not as somebody entering a claim, but as somebody looking at arguments. We don't want to. We want something that is logically consistent. And logically consistent. And logically logical consistency is where the notion of negation becomes useful. Like, that way we may have introduced negation.
Well, and from a user perspective as well. I mean, Felix has a point that it confuses the users for when you allow something like that, as well as other reasons. But the point here as process dictator is I am accepting things to be stated as requirements as well. Now I've loosened up the process to allow you to either state as a use case or as a requirement. I think it'll help us it'll help untangle the language, which is what's happening here.
Okay.
And I changed the one we're looking at just to say a claim cannot be a negation of itself. Does that make sense to people?
And that's a requirement, yes.
That's a requirement, yeah.
And then I can let go of a user tries to assert blah, 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 remove that one.
Right, and then you can add, you know, that a claim cannot also reference itself. A claim, you know, things like that. And that's quick and easy. We can do that.
I'm happy with, okay, reference. Now that's interesting because we need to define reference.
Well, in this case, I mean specifically, the relation equivalent to does not, in the relationship equivalent to a claim cannot be that you cannot use the same claim on both ends.
Well, or rather, it's always implicitly equivalent to itself, and there's no explicit equivalent relation. There's no need for an explicit equivalent relation. Claim.
I think the latter makes more sense than the former.
I think
But yeah,
that's
it does raise the question of what a good model is, and I hinted at that. Does it mean that if you don't store equivalence from yeah, no, I'll get back to that later. Let's first go through this process.
Okay. Now, one problem I have is I'm really curious what happens here if I put that one here. This is reflexive, symmetric. Well, this is what I'll put a question mark because, and transitive. Yeah, I was afraid of that. Okay. Yay, that worked.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't look too bad.
I'm surprised.
What worked?
Declaring N1 and declaring C. I'm saying claim N1 and 2, and here I'm using them as nodes. Anyway, it's a bit weird, but these are not classes. I'm able to put a node on 2 different arrows with the same source and destination. Which
I'm not looking at the right thing. I don't know which way to go here.
I'm very happy with.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay. Okay.
That's called taking.
So are we done with? Yeah. Are we done with row 5 here? Claim cannot be a negation of itself. Is that completed?
Yes, I'm happy with it.
All right.
Can we declare this one completed? The claim is always implicitly, never explicitly equivalent to itself. I think that's a fast one.
We need to
propose that we do that next. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is this what we all want to do next?
Yeah.
Why did it not change color? We need a color for proposed. Okay.
Not important.
I can do it.
Yeah. Okay. We could just sort too. Okay. Anyone else want to propose something else? Are we good? We're going to do this one. 3, 2, 1. We're doing this one. In progress. A claim is always implicitly, never explicitly equivalent to itself. Okay. I'll agree.
Yeah. The devil's in the details. I don't know. But yeah. So this is a requirement on the modeling level, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yes.
this use case is only relevant as long as the model is the way it is right now. So how do we deal with it if the model changes and this requirement is no longer relevant? How do we deal with cases like that?
I think if the model changes, the constraint remains. I may be wrong. I'm not sure. Like saying it's always implicitly equivalent to itself, that's a logical constraint. How it's modeled is a bit transparent. And never explicitly there, it may be possible that in some models, the explicit is impossible, but that has no impact on the constraint.
The definition I would take of itself is the exact same instance.
Yeah, but
the
that's
same ID or whatever.
Data model. So it's linked to the.
No, but yeah.
Referring to, right? If your instance is modeled differently, So now we have a claim instance, but suppose we model it differently and that instance you're referring to as a claim instance is gone, because it might make sense to model it that way. Then
What is an example of a claim that doesn't have an instance?
if you store, like I said, if you're moving towards, for example, a model where you have the sentence and the negation living within the same instance, where is your claim instance at that point?
We're talking about the instance of the claim, we're not talking about the sentence, the statement.
I was going to ask, when you say the same instance of the claim, is it implicit, or should we make it explicit, that two claims with the same sentence are the same claim? There cannot be two claims with the same sentence, because that's.
So now we're talking about identity of classes, which indeed is very relevant.
Yeah. Is that implicitly acknowledged, or I mean, was that your hypothesis? In which case we should make it explicit.
Say that again.
Is it possible to have two claims with the same sentence?
Yes. According to the current model, according to the current set of requirements.
Yeah,
there's
but is that
constraint that says no?
Okay, but is that the constraint you would want?
Well, that's something you can propose as a use case or requirement, and we can discuss that.
No, I'm asking if you want to propose it. I
don't want to propose it right now, but anybody is free to propose it right now.
Okay, cool.
Um,
So that means that the notion of itself is indeed ambiguous. So because we could say to the same instance, but does it make sense to have equivalence between two different claims with the same sentence?
Itself here means exact same instances, what I put in the description.
Okay, so let's
this requirement is talking specifically about exact same instance.
Okay, so let's say that itself is clear enough, and okay, cool.
But Marc-Antoine, when you're saying same sentence, that could depend on the context, right? If they're equivalent or not. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that is indeed a question.
Wait. That is not a question. Sticking to the process, sentence is an attribute of claim.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you say sentence, you're talking about an attribute of a claim instance, right?
So just again, to emphasize, the problem with this process that I see, I'm okay with moving forward with it, but all the use cases refer to the data model. They're not, as the model changes, our previous use cases are going to break. I can see that happening, because now, okay, let's just move ahead. But I honestly don't think this approach works if we don't decouple the actual use cases from the data model. The data model cannot naturally evolve to encompass all use cases. But
okay, we'll have that problem, and we'll deal with it when we get there, and we'll adjust the process accordingly.
I will add I will propose a use case.
Wait. Are we done with the claim? We haven't said we're done. Are we done with it? Does everybody agree with this requirement as stated? Okay. And is it incorporated into the model? It's that would be what?
Reflexive. I'll remove the question mark.
Anti-reflexive.
No, it's the reflexive here that I would remove the question mark.
Okay, so it is reflexive. Okay.
Does the reflexive bit also entail that the non-explicit part?
No, the explicit. I'm leaving the explicitness out of here right now.
Okay, because that's a use case we're claiming to cover right now. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I could add. Okay.
I would probably rewrite the use case to
implicitly reflexive. That's it.
Okay, fair enough.
And I guess the same in negation, you would need to say implicitly anti-reflexive.
No, that's explicit. See, implicit is about okay, what does implicit means in the data model? And here Stephen is right, it's premature to put the implicit in the data model. I mean, I think it makes sense to say it's there in the requirements. Here I'm saying in the data model, implicitly reflexive means I don't need to materialize this arrow. In the case of a negation, anti-reflexive means I will never materialize this arrow. So there's no notion of implicit or explicit. It's this object won't be there.
But it's the same thing in the reflexive case. That arrow will not be there of a thing pointing to itself and saying.
Yes, and that's what I mean by implicitly. The arrow won't be materialized, but it is supposed to be there from the point of view of the data model. If I ask, is this equivalent, is A equivalent to A, the system should say yes, even if the arrow is not be there. That's what I mean by reflexive. But there should be a way to ask, is this equivalent to that? And the system should just say.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Who wants to propose the next requirement?
The next requirement or next use case?
Use case, same thing. We are mixing use cases and requirements. Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, mine's still in proposal, and I guess I'd still kind of like to hear why we're choosing things that we don't already agree on, as opposed to choosing things we do mostly agree on.
People argument are just choosing things we can, yeah.
Well, so I propose we choose the things that already exist in all of our systems in order to get the data, move into a useful data model, rather than going down this certain path of everything possible that could be in a claim. And I think that would be more agile.
I'm almost going the other way and say, let's look at the things that are difficult, because this is where we'll discover the real refactorings. And I just added one at the bottom.
I don't think our goal is to discover the real refactorings. Our goal is to come together on a base model. I mean, that's...
Well, it's both. I think, see, if the base model is going to fly apart when we go to the difficult cases, we're losing a lot of time.
So you think you're going to rechange how, well, it's going to...
I'm going for fail. I'm going for fail
process owner, here's the guideline. It's something that will make a minimal change that we can agree on to the model, which means you can propose something brand new. It just needs to be stated in a way that you can imagine a very simple tweak to the model. It's okay to have big discussions around that tweak, that's fine. But if it's just introducing argument without discussing what is an argument, in other words, something is proposed to oppose or support, right?
No, I'm going to make meta objections to this. If something that we propose has huge implications, I don't think it should be prevented for that reason alone. Maybe there's
yeah, huge implications are important. It's just they shouldn't be like huge implications as in we need a whole new subsystem of introducing 5 different classes here at once, that sort of thing. It should be one step, the next step.
Let's say that I approve that if somebody proposes such a thing and somebody proposes a way to do it more progressively, we should absolutely prefer that. How's that?
I would still like to just document what we already agree on at some point earlier. And I think
okay. Wait.
Things that we don't agree on.
Okay, we're worrying about not getting anywhere, and we're not getting anywhere. Again, this is the opposite of what we're trying to do with this process. So the current step is propose a use case or a requirement, and then we'll choose between those 2 or 3 or 4 use cases. I don't want to hear theoretical discussions about the right path. We can discuss which one you want to do next.
And we're arguing on why we're not doing my use case.
No, I understand, but if nobody else has a use case to propose, there's no point in the argument. We're going to do your use case.
But I think the question is what we're discussing is what are good use cases that we can agree on. And for me, the main problem is I want to agree on use cases that show shortcomings in the model, because I want a model that is good. And the point of contention might be here what a good model is. And that's why I wrote this thing in Hangouts before. I just shared it again. For me, a good model models constraints. It prevents constraints from happening. It prevents the model from being misused. So if we agree on model,
again,
yeah.
If you have an alternative use case, propose it now. Otherwise, we're going to go with Bentley's use case.
Yeah. Well, there are already there many. Like I have many in. There's too many.
Mark it as proposed. Just mark it as proposed.
Okay. Oh, it's a drop down now. Awesome. Done.
Yeah. Technology is advancing before our eyes. Okay. Anybody else have anything to propose?
The whip case, should we put it back to declared or proposed? Because it's obviously not whip now.
If it's not whip, then whoever created it and marked it whipped, put it in whatever state you want it to be in, except.
That's cool.
Also proposed.
Yeah.
All of these are more important than argument. Yeah. All of them, in my opinion, are opposed over the supporting one.
Stephen, you proposed 3. Can you narrow it down to 1?
Yeah,
I proposed 1 in there.
Let's pick the easiest one. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the one that was originally whip.
User wants to be able to see the negation for any claim in the system, even when it was not defined. Okay, so we have 3. Let's pick. Either it's creating an argument supportive of a claim. It's being able to see the negation for any claim in the system, even when it's not defined. Or a user may declare that 2 claims are neither equivalent nor negation of one another.
This one is mostly a gateway to the next one. But
I understand, all right.
Since you want incremental, and that's valid in this case, let's be incremental.
Where's that?
Isn't that the case if the one that Mark Antoine proposed, neither equivalent nor negation, isn't that the case if nothing is modeled? If you just have 2 claims?
No. It's absence. Absence is not the same as I can assert that neither is true.
Okay, so it's similar to one I added before. Where was it? That they're not the same. I think I wrote somewhere. Yeah, a user asserts that 2 claims are not equivalent in meaning, which is.
Oh, sorry, it is absolutely equivalent to that. Yes.
Okay, let's split them up into.
But mine is a bit more precise because it's saying not equivalent, neither equivalent nor negation, because not equivalent could encompass negation. But maybe we need them separate. Maybe we need them the same.
The only way they're different is if it's a user is disagreeing with an existing assertion that 2 claims are equivalent. That's different. Which is the next one. So I think we don't need both of these.
I take objection to that. I think it's perfectly possible to say these are not equivalent as to preempt negation or equivalence. And especially if these claims look similar, and I want to say, those look similar. Somebody could say those are equivalent, but you know what? They're not. I want to introduce a distinction. So I think that preempting similarity is an action. It's a user action. And I would model it as such.
Okay. So what happened to the other proposed one? It was remarked as declared.
Well, I find this very interesting because I both agree and disagree. So I fully agree. I find an interesting use case because it clearly talks about a different bounded context, in my opinion, which we need. And it opens up the whole discussion about what it even means to model a negation in this model. Because yeah, that's why I agree with that one, because it's an important discussion to have.
Which one?
The one I proposed.
This use case that Marc-Antoine proposes
on line 14
highlights ambiguity in what it means to have a negation link. Does it mean that you model it as such, or does it mean that you propose it as such? That's why I find it interesting, because this is where I introduced the whole two separate bound context need for.
Interesting, because I see what you're saying, and I don't think that's even part of what I'm saying. It may be true. I mean, what you say is true independently of what I'm saying. I think it's orthogonal. I find it interesting that you see them as related.
It boils down to what are we modeling, really?
No, what I'm saying is what I'm proposing is true even without that concern you're raising about the bounded context of proposing versus asserting.
Yeah, it is. But if you encompass that in this model, how do you see that? I want to see that happening.
Oh,
okay. My understanding of use case 14 is essentially the creation of an explicit link between two claims that denies their equivalence or their negation.
Yes.
Is that what is meant?
Yes.
So let's not talk about anything other than that for here. But we need to decide, do people want to talk about arguments now, or do people want to talk about claims? The negation, not equivalence relationship. Voting?
Well, I think this delves into clarifying what these relations are, and rather than adding something new, yet another relation, which is yet another many-to-many relation, probably, I want to resolve these current two many-to-many relations we have, which are utterly ambiguous. So that's why I propose the Marc-Antoine one.
So you vote for 14?
Yes.
Marc-Antoine, 14?
By far
Felix, do you have an opinion?
No opinion. Both are fine for me.
And I'm sure Bentley wants to do number 7.
But he's not there, so
okay. Well,
I think let's do it. Let's do it when he's there.
Then, yeah, I agree with that. And also, I was going to say, unfortunately, I see what he's worried about, but I'm willing to go a little bit further on this path before.
This just means we try it. It might mean that we put it on the backlog again, which I hope is what will happen. But I hope by having a discussion, the model we already have becomes less ambiguous. That's why I'm voting for this one.
Right, that's fine. We're doing it. I've moved it. It's in progress now. Number 7 now.
Nobody's rejecting the Bentley's
use case. It's just we're not doing it now. Yeah.
It's a valid use case. It's important and all that.
Okay, so understanding this use case, I would say I do not want to see this use case in the system.
So now it comes down to what is a system, what is the scope of the system, and that's why I'm arguing these are separate bounded contexts. I agree, it's not part of the bounded context we want to focus on right now.
Well, that's one of the things that can happen to a use case, is that we decide. I don't know. I think I mentioned it in the process or not, but the next step is really saying, do we accept this use case as part of the system? And by the system, I would mean the core system. My definition is based on these statuses, which is core is something we all agree needs to be supported.
Yeah, and again,
optional is something that goes outside.
Isn't like to me this one is like it depends on how you interpret the current model. Like if you say, okay, there's nothing is undefined and the absence of equivalence is not equivalence, then the model already does it.
No, okay.
Right, it's implicit. It is implicit when it's,
There's two discussions there.
Yeah.
One is core versus non-core, and as a methodology, I think the problem is we're negotiating what's core and what's non-core, and can those be separated and bounded? So I understand you're the dictator for this process, but I reserve the right to say the process is meant to exclude aspects which I believe are important, and pushing them outside core can be one thing, but then we have to negotiate the core. And for me, this is core. If you're saying
right, no, but that's exactly what the process is supposed to do here, is bring up when there's this kind of disagreement, we're supposed to discuss it. The process isn't supposed to push off everything forever until it's not part of the system. It's meant to highlight exactly the
no, but
points of
what I'm
contention
saying
and discuss
is, if you have both as dictator the right to say we're only talking about the core in this part of the process, and I decide what's core and non-core, then you're defining the system.
I never said that.
Oh, no.
I never said
yeah,
that.
but I'm just warning against this.
No,
yeah.
But
Yeah,
what
I am the
Second,
process
second.
dictator. I am the process dictator. I'm not the
exactly.
decision dictator.
Exactly. So we want.
What I would love to hear is your rationale
for saying that this
for
is
what
core.
you define core and what is inside and outside. Like, how do you define the scope of core? Like, what is the system or the core system to you? Rather than saying I don't want this, like, why don't you want this?
Yeah, exactly.
No. We're negotiating. That's what this negotiation is. You know, if it's something we all agree should be in the system, and in the system means in every single system, in my opinion, then it's core. That's the definition.
Because for me, the system is, I can both answer yes and no to that question, depending on what you mean by system. I want it in the system, but I don't want it in this bounded context. And that
yeah.
So
but why you? Yeah, but then you are arbitrarily, unilaterally deciding what are bounded contexts, right?
He's proposing a boundary, and the boundary can be negotiated.
Exactly. I'm asking you, what is your understanding of your current boundary to see whether or not that might align with.
But let me ask you the following question: why do you need it in a separate bounded context? What is the point of moving it to a separate bounded context? Wait, no. I want an answer to this question. What is the driver for putting it in a separate bounded context?
Decoupling focus. So the fact is, if you have a different bounded context, it also means you have a different model. It means you have different use cases you model within that bounded context. It means you might use different terminology. It might that's the main reason.
No, but that's designing ahead of the need, right? You want to move it somewhere that in your head it's easier to think about it as a separate thing, as opposed
it's
to
even irrelevant. All I was asking you is why for you is it not part of the system?
Okay, this to me is not part of the system because I see no use in preemptively declaring something's not equivalent with another. I think that it makes more sense. It's easier to manage, and it's easier. It's just easier to manage and deal with implicitly assuming that any two claims are not equivalent nor negations unless someone makes the effort or something makes the effort to declare something equivalent or declare something a negation. I think it should be implicitly assumed that two claims are neither equivalent nor negation until an assertion is made.
Okay, and how is this different or the same than if somebody said two claims are the same and then someone comes in and says these are not the same? Is this a different use case? Does it overlap with this use case? How should I see that?
If somebody has made an assertion that two claims are the same and then somebody makes an assertion that the two claims are not the same.
Yeah.
That's very different. It's conflicting. It's conflicting assertions in that case, right? This is an assertion that none of these other things should happen, right? It's very different. If one person says these are the same, another person said these are the opposite. This is a totally different thing where somebody came in and said these are neither the same nor the opposite. And it's going to start a debate over, oh, I didn't even think, like, you know, a horse is an apple. A horse is neither an apple nor a, no, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, but it is a debate I don't see that should be had unless somebody is already making an assertion of one or the other.
Okay, I think I can agree, and based on that, I would be okay with moving this one back to declared and maybe finding alternative use cases to work on.
Can I argue for my use case now?
Yes, yeah, no, let Marc-Antoine respond.
Frankly, at this point, it's like I proposed this, and
yeah, just my input. I'm not saying you have
yeah,
to.
fair enough. You're allowed to think that, but let me first make an argument. Didn't yet, and I see what you're saying about there's the whole case of handling disagreement, which may or may not be another bounded domain, and that's part of what we're negotiating. But I'm saying outside of the issue of disagreement, the issue of saying everything we don't have is implicitly different, for me, that seems to be a mistake, because there's, end claim and squared relations, and we don't claim equivalence is something we add one at a time, and there's no when we're doing that because there's a vacuum, and saying these look the same but aren't is highly important information. And in a way, it's symmetric. Like if somebody first says they're the same and then comes afterwards and says, no, you're wrong, they're not the same, it's exactly symmetric with the situation where someone says those look the same but aren't. No, they're the same actually. It's the order should not matter. Like there's a confusion around those claims. It's important to know that there's a confusion and that it can be resolved one way or another. And I don't see why you would enforce going one direction before the other. I don't care if in the system, the way to assert difference is to first put an equivalent claim and then negate it myself. Sure, whatever. I think that's a stupid way to go, but it's not important. But what is important is that confusion is going to be frequent. The fact that the claims are contentious is information, and it's information I want to capture.
Isn't it the use case in that case more like saying these claims are similar? Isn't that the actual user?
I've no problem if we did that. We could say similar but not equivalent would be a perfect. Another one I want is this one is a refinement of that one. Like for me, there's all kind of relationships. But for me, what's really important is saying this one is not to be confused with. The fact that it's similar is kind of background to that it is at all relevant to say not to be confused with.
It seems like I think I agree with Tim that a user wouldn't say this is not the same than another claim. That seems like a very user interaction.
I doubt that. I really like the argument of Marc-Antoine that say, okay, these could be confused with one another, so I state that they're not equivalent. I think that's a very important point.
No, I agree. It's an important point, and what's even more interesting is, to me, is where that takes my brain in this process, alluding to what Stephen's been saying before. But I think the solution to this should be a different one, but we haven't introduced into the model the objects and terms that would be required to do that, which maybe means I would propose putting this off until later again. But my solution to it being implicit, according to the white paper, would be context or disambiguation or something like that. In other words, instead of declaring that they are neither equivalent nor negations, you declare what they are through disambiguation, and that implicitly increases the notion that they're not the same.
And by the way, this is what I would do as well. I would introduce what I call a distinguo in my model. I would say these are different, and this is how they're different. This is the distinction underlying the difference between those claims. But sometimes, and this is, sorry, I'll make another argument, however, there's such a thing as progressive formalization, which we've spoken about. And I would say that declaring the non-equivalence is a first step to introducing a formal distinction. You first say, I think these are not the same, and then, okay, what do you mean they're not the same? Well, I think this is how they differ, and then let's make that formal. I see that as a progressive process.
Yeah. So, and I think this is exactly the problem with the two-bound context I see. I think what Timothy wants to model, and me too, and why I do say it's a different bound context, and why I believe that Timothy says that it's not part of the system. The system is, I think, a formalized argument. It's like, it's the result of all these other things where people might say, hey, I don't think these are equivalent. Hey, I don't think these are, I do think that's a negation. One is commenting on a formalized argument or wanting to come to a conclusion of a formalized argument. The other one, the system, that bounded context, is the actual formalized argument. It's the result of contributions.
Oh my Lord.
That's what I always call these two separate bounded contexts. One is the outcome of the other. I think we only want to talk about the outcome right now. Or if we could focus only on the outcome, then we can still say, like, within that model, I don't think these two are negations. I do think these are negations, which is, it sounds similar, but in one, it is modeled as a negation and it's assumed if there's no links, they are different. In the other one, you can still do everything else as well, and you can raise contradictions.
Now I understand why we disagree. It's fascinating because you want to have the informal as a layer over the formal, and I want the formal as a layer over the informal.
Can you? I think you have to elaborate on that to be certain.
No, that's
hold on. Pause as process master. We're already 5 minutes over time. I think I could go on a little bit longer, but at this point, you know, if people need to move on, then we should put this off until next week.
Finish this use case.
I don't know if we can finish this use case, but I think
it's a long discussion, but we could continue for now. While time.
Continue 15 minutes.
I have time. For me, very short, summed up what I said. Saying as a user, I want to add a negation. It's two different use cases. It really is. One is a developer that wants to model this. The formalized model believes that it is a negation. The other one is, as a user, I want to claim basically that it is a negation. I think these are two separate things, and treating them the same way in one model is very confusing because they are separate. They're both valid, but I think they're two separate bounded contexts.
No, okay, and hard disagree on this.
Yeah, I'm with Marc-Antoine here.
I think that there's two bounded contexts. I think we agree on that. There's one in which we have purely formal claims and one in which we have informal claims. And now I'm realizing that we have a kind of Copernican disagreement here. What's the center and what's the periphery? I put the informal modeling at the center and the formal modeling as a layer above that. And you want the formal to be the core and the informal to float around it as an added layer. So that, I don't know if that's something we'll resolve, but I just want to point out the difference in perspective. And when Tim speaks of the core, I always thought the core is what we all have in common. And for me, that included the basis of the core, which means the informal.
For me, it's the formal.
So
the attempts to model formal.
Anyway, so that's one thing. But
wait. Let me disagree. With the two bounded contexts, I don't see two bounded contexts. I see gradual formalization as being the same thing as, you know, you didn't fill out all the fields, but they can be added later on. It's gradual. It's not suddenly this is formal before it was informal. It's, oh, you know, I noticed this thing. I want to make this distinction now. I want to add this. I want to add this. It's incremental, and therefore you can't do that with two distinct bounded contexts.
So for you, informal is part of the core, as for me. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
For me as well, it's all part of the core. It has nothing to do with curation or like community moderation or anything.
Yeah, and the second point, Stephen, is that no, even if we carve things the way you do, I still argue that the confusing looks like similar but different is valid at both layers, because the distinguo at least is those are distinct, and here's why, is certainly valid at the logic layer. And there's certainly something that I want to introduce. These two claims are different, and here's why they're different. If we're purely in the formal level, it exists there. And the informal version of that is they're distinct, but I'm not sure how. Okay, that's only informal, fair enough. But those are distinct. They're not a negation. They're not equivalent. They're something else. They're distinct. I think that belongs even at the logic layer. And that's a separate point.
Okay, so focusing back on the use case here.
Now, maybe it needs to be reformulated a bit, because maybe we want to speak about the formal distinction versus the informal distinction. And I'm happy if we separate that. I think that's
not even certain it's clear what the distinction is.
Okay, let me go it.
No. I'm certain you have an opinion of it. I'm not certain we're all aligned on what the distinction is.
Yes, okay. Yeah, we're not.
Fair enough. No, but what I was saying is, if there's a disagreement on that distinction, maybe that's something that needs to be negotiated before we accept that use case. But
yeah, but we go back in abstracts, which is not the point of this process. So I don't know, Timothy, what do you suggest? Because, I mean...
That's not abstract. I'm
saying
let's make it more concrete.
This will lead into a discussion like the theoretical discussion we've always been
having. We have two options here. We plow ahead with the difference and resolve it because we're going to have to at some point, or we retreat to something like Bentley recommended, that is the commonalities we know about, so we can flesh those out more and then circle back. I'm kind of leaning towards the Bentley approach at this moment, unless there's some other big realization that we can come at right now. But I think
we can shelve the formal discussion for Friday, right? That's what that day is.
That's not what I'll focus on Friday, though it will be related.
And you can still have one-on-ones or 3 people separating or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like the Tuesday and Friday at regular dates, but you're free to have more
absolutely true.
Discussions on
absolutely true. What is clear is that right now there's too much disagreement about what the use case means for us to agree on it.
So we cannot end right now.
We cannot close it.
Yes.
We need to go. I think we should go deeper. I mean, if we're going to avoid problems whenever they arise, this is another way to not progress. In my opinion.
But you know what? I'm going to table this one based on a separate realization, which is that sometimes what we're missing is kind of the deeper understanding of the things we agree on other things. Because the question that isn't answered here and where we disagree is why we want that. The user does this so that, right? We haven't done that for the equivalent and negation. Why do we want equivalence and why do we want negation? So that, and I think we disagree on the so that's. And I think by adding more use cases, we will help kind of flesh out at a separate angle all the so that's.
Yeah,
that's my reason.
And this is why we were discussing requirements versus use cases. The requirements leave the use case implicit. There, I agree totally. I don't think it's a good idea to table this because it's one case where the discrepancy in use cases is obvious, but I agree that it's not about focusing on this use case. It's about what does it reveal about our difference of perspective, and we need to get into the difference of perspective about.
Right. But so I think we have learned from this use case. We haven't incorporated it yet, but it would be good to incorporate some more before we try again. That's what I think.
I disagree. No, I think the question about, for example, is the informal model part of the core? That will that's major.
But that discussion has gotten really abstract. That's the problem. Is that
Friday. For me, I cannot fully say it yet, but for me, saying that something is not the negation of something else is not part of what I would call argument modeling. It can be if that's an arguments, right? But I think what I'm trying to do is I want to formalize an argument Like somebody makes an argument, how do we formalize it? That's the system that I'm focusing on.
I can do it at the argument level, but what I'm saying is when I'm saying at the claim level or at the entity level, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. This is distinct from that because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
This is a distinct, it's a distinction. This is a formal, that's part of formal entity claim argument modeling.
Yeah, but for my point here is my use case, is my bounded context is I want to, as a user, write an argument and I want to formalize that argument and I want to send that formalized argument to someone else.
Yes, exactly. And I'm saying distinctions are part of that formalization of the argument, because you want to say, how is this argument not the same as that one? Here is how. That's part of the what you're sending over.
No, but we're talking about it's not this. It's not these two.
It's not the same, and that's why I said let me break this into two. And you said, oh, that's too abstract. It's like I don't see how it's abstract in any single way, but that's or any more abstract than any of the other things on the list right now.
The use case is concrete. I agree. It's very concrete. What is has gotten abstract is a discussion about why we would want to incorporate that use case.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
and I think we're totally misaligned on what the system is.
No, and what I'm saying is let me separate this in two cases, because there's one case that fits into what you call the system, and the other case fits into what me and Tim call the system. Because you're right, we're misaligned on this. But I also say I have this use case, because of this discussion, I can break it up in two, and I will, because I think it's needed to do so. And one part of it fits in your universe.
I'm very curious what these are.
Yeah, but either way, it seems we agreed to then, at least for now, put this one back on declared, and then indeed look at maybe.
Let's circle back. I'm gonna put this as declared. If people have another, Jamie's going okay, but she's just been lurking. So if you guys want to follow up with a split use case and see what that looks like, I could give another 15 minutes.
I'd say let's let me write it. I think it's
okay.
I would say let's do that next time myself. But let's.
I'm also getting hungry. I might get food soon.
User.
Yeah, this is good. I think if we agreed, like we can just put stuff back rather than modeling it if it leads to too many complications. I think that's a good addition to the process.
Yeah.
I think it was implicitly part of the process. I'm not sure if I wrote out that could be done, but yeah.
But as I'm also not a big fan of pushing away complexity rather than resolving it. Like, I think resolving makes sense because at some point we will have to resolve.
Yeah, but my contention is
now adding new use cases that get more to the core of the disagreements. If like these discussions, we can more identify core use cases that are more directly hinting at the underlying disagreement. Makes sense.
Let me lay out my reasoning a little more. My argument, a lot of my reasonings of why I want to declare these things, like I want to declare something as a negation of something else. I want to declare that something is equivalent to, they have to do with curation, which is Stephen would like to treat as a separate domain. I would, but at any rate, I would like to see it in the system as, well, if they're equivalent, then they must share all the same arguments and they must share all the same, context or disambiguations and so on and so forth. And for simplicity, I probably want to see them merged into one thing to reduce the complexity of the graph.
Canonicality. What do you call canonicality? You want to
right. And I want to be able to. I also think about how these modelings and designs affect scoring and the processing of the scoring, which is more implementation. But at any rate, all these things come into my reasoning of why I want something, and none of these have been introduced as use cases. That is my guideline for saying, oh, let's push this back and let's try to introduce these other use cases so that when we reintroduce this use case, we can say, yeah, but I want that because of this use case and because of that use case and because that's in the model it shows, right? In other words, I want to be able to have these discussions as concrete things rather than the abstractions we're working with right now.
Okay, you do realize that everything you just mentioned falls under the use case I was proposing.
It's implied in the use case you're
Fair
proposing,
enough.
but
Fair
we don't
enough.
have the terms in the model yet, right?
And I'm perfectly open. You're saying, if you're saying that use case is too all-encompassing and I want to get into precise sub-use cases, I think that's perfectly valid. And I'm perfectly happy to delve into specific sub-use cases of that.
Yeah, it's not even, like I said, I think it's a very concrete use case. What isn't concrete is the why we want the use case. And if we have to use terms that are not because of all the previous use cases we've talked about and because it's in the model, then we move into the realm of abstractions and we don't resolve. That's my bias in terms of this process, is how I think the process should go. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And another side note here, bounded contexts are determined by user stories, not by what you call use cases here. So that is immensely important.
There I agree totally. So that we've been, the problem with requirements is that we kind of neglect the so that side of things, and there I'm with you totally. It's true that I realize the way my new use case comes, it introduces all kinds of, like I'm introducing entities. Oops, they haven't been introduced yet. On the other hand, it's clear to me that entities is how we will introduce a distinction.
Right.
Okay.
But but let's introduce them one at a time, basically.
But they're the motivation for that.
As an example of what you just highlighted, because the current proposed one is by Marc-Antoine, right?
Yep.
Okay. Which one do you propose? Because you mentioned you wanted to bring up some use cases that will clarify things that the other one will upon, right?
One made a use case that contains the explicit distinction, like his how do you call it, Marc-Antoine?
Well, distinguo. I call it a distinguo. Yeah. Our distinction is good too.
Yeah.
It's less technical.
Like the reason why they're not equivalent.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll capitalize distinction because this is kind of what I'm in.
Yeah, I think this is an argument in my opinion. So I think this use case builds on top of first having use case to add arguments, in my opinion. So I think this one tries to add too much at once according to the criteria of the process.
That's interesting because for me, distinction has nothing to do with arguments. So we'll get into a real modeling. How do we model arguments? Yep. And how do we model distinctions? More to the point.
Exactly.
So Bentley's back. Bentley, what you missed is that basically we went the other way from what you were proposing, and now we've had an interesting discussion, and now we're going to probably circle back towards what you were proposing, which is focusing on some more of the commonalities and introducing more of the concepts. Where we are over time, and I don't know if we want to go through one. Yeah. So maybe it's, when we come back on next Tuesday, you propose again the argument use case, and maybe people will decide to start from there. Does that sound good to everybody?
So one other thing is maybe we could put our names next to them so we know who to ask questions, either a new column or put it in the text like I did.
Yeah, that makes sense. But
put a column in front, I'd say.
Yeah, because it's I guess it's not. Will it still be relevant after they've been incorporated?
No. So yeah, just in the text somewhere.
Okay, that's fine. So yeah, one thing I'm going to write in the document then is the following heuristic, which is if if people can't decide on, well, I'll have to figure that in wording. It's just this learning that if we don't know why use case is needed, we may need to circle back and introduce, or if the explanation of the use case is requiring more concepts that aren't in the model or in the use cases, it might be a good idea to circle back.
Marc-Antoine, you stole one of my proposals.
Oh, did I? I tried to go by memory and I may have made a mistake there. Just take it
Maybe
back.
I made a mistake. I don't know. I
Go
don't
for
really
mine,
care.
Not important. We can put two names, but which one was it? The
negation of whatever, the first one that I introduced. Oh, no, so you wrote the same one, I think. So this is you and... No, but now you're in both. It doesn't matter. You can have them both.
No, 1 second. This is clearly yours. Are not equivalent. That was yours. My version was this one.
This one was mine, I think. The one that was too mathematical according to Tim. Claims
Okay.
equivalent to a claim, which is a negation of a second claim, or also negation. Yeah, that's mine. I remember writing that. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. That one is yours. Yes, I did the other one, which is this one.
Sounds very similar. I haven't.
It's not. Yeah, it's not. It's not.
Analyzing it.
We should explicitly state that they're not equivalent.
Yes, exactly. and see,
But we're
this
not
is,
doing argument modeling, Felix. This is not argument modeling, which is my point.
but my point is non-equivalence has nothing to do with argument modeling. It can it can be relevant at the claim level or even at the entity level.
Okay, I'll think on my end to create a good use case to highlight what I call argument modeling as a use case. I don't know. I'm still struggling. I still see it as different bound context, and I find it highly confusing. But I need to be able to better express myself.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
See you.
All right, see you guys on Friday.
See you guys on Friday.
Bye bye.
Bye.